This is the story of someone I never met, but wish I had. In some ways we're strangely similar, in other ways very, very different. 50 years ago, he was a household name. Today, not so many people have heard of him. He was my father-in-law, and his name is Rory McEwen.
I loved being with him. If I knew I was going to see him, my spirits would rise.
He was startling. He was very quick and articulate, also a very natty dresser.
Well, Rory was just sort of magical.
He had an amazing gift for bringing people together, for creativity and friendship.
You cannot explain the genius of someone called Rory McEwen by concentrating on only one aspect of what he produced.
He's a man of many parts, an astonishing artist.
Here's a guy who draws, you know, like nobody has ever seen in the 20th century. I was dazzled by the technique.
Rory didn't really do anything that wasn't really beautiful. Everything he did was very, very beautifully done.
He was a pioneering television presenter, songwriter, and groundbreaking musician.
I think he should fit in at the very beginning of introducing the blues to the UK audiences. But as to why this has never been acknowledged, I don't know. I think it's sort of time for a renaissance, really.
Every time you think you know where he's going, he goes in another direction. So here it is, the story of Rory McEwen. We begin in 1932, in the Scottish borders, where Rory was born into a large aristocratic family.
Rory grew up at this extraordinary place, Marchmont, a Palladian house near Polwarth in Scotland. It had a mile-long drive. You know, they were part of the real Catholic establishment. His father was Under-Secretary of State for Scotland, also a poet and also a Francophile, so they're very cosmopolitan.
I think we were hugely privileged. He describes it as an 18th century upbringing, and to some extent it was. I mean, there were still horses and carts and all the rest of it. We were very much in tune with aesthetics of nature. And the house was always crammed full of flowers.
Rory was taught by a French governess who encouraged him to paint flowers, a skill that he'd never forget.
I think Rory's background at Marchmont was hugely important to him. He felt a terrific pride in it, you know. They were an amazing family.
Our eldest brother was a mad, keen jazz fan, and he was also a great influence on Rory in terms of his musical tastes, because it was there that he first heard Lead Belly, Josh White, Big Bill Broonzy.
Oh, Alberta! Oh, Alberta!
I think my father and his younger brother Alexander heard this music and tried and taught themselves to play guitar from listening to the records that Jamie accumulated.
At Cambridge in the early 50s, Rory performed in the Footlights with other like-minded students.
I think I gradually became aware of the fact that he was a musician and played rather brilliant jazz guitar. And I think, and I can't remember the exact date when we began to associate doing cabarets together for those reviews at the end of the year. And he would play something and then I would do something comic and then he would play again. We had very amusing times together as this pair of entertainers.
After Cambridge, Rory and younger brother Alexander set sail for America, really the very first people from Britain to explore the roots of folk and blues music.
I'm in New York City, I'm gonna know my
First stop was New York City, the last home of Rory's idol, Louisiana-born Huddie Ledbetter, Leadbelly, king of the 12-string guitar.
New York City, people got to know my line.
Rory was so ahead of his time, and so was his brother, because they knew the background of the blues. And he went to see Leadbelly's widow, Martha. They made this pilgrimage. Rory was nervous, thinking she won't like these two Scottish boys singing her late husband's songs. But it was a great success. They played War Buck, this wonderful Leadbelly song, to her. She clapped her hands. Then she produced this wonderful guitar, this 12-string which he played. So there he was. He was in the Valhalla, whatever it is. He was in the kind of temple of 12-string.
The McEwen brothers crossed America, playing gigs to growing acclaim. These unlikely Scottish stars amazingly performed on the network Ed Sullivan Show, years before the Beatles did the same, leading the British invasion. Back in Britain, Rory was talent spotted by the BBC's Cliff Mitchellmore when he came to launch The Tonight programme in 1957.
It will be a programme with lots of young people in it. One of them, for instance, is now back in this country after getting on the Ed Sullivan Show in New York whilst singing his way across the United States.
On a Monday, I was arrested.
They used to have a slot for various folk singers. Rory was, you know, the man one I connected with because he played really good 12-string guitar in the style of Leadbelly. When I saw, you know, someone actually on TV doing this material, I was like, wow. It was one of those kind of moments, and it got me into, like, taking music seriously, because until that point, I wanted to be a vet.
Rory was now a rising star, and he was given his very own show, the trailblazer for television to come.
He followed me mother around the town.
Hullabaloo was the first folk show on television. First one actually devoted to folk music, folk and blues.
Good evening and welcome to Hullabaloo. We're going to start the show this evening on the Mersey.
Rory was the compere, he introduced the acts and he played. And you had this mix of folk singers from Glasgow, folk singer, and, you know, Sonny Boy Williamson, black players that were brought over from America. An extraordinary mix.
I'm going down the road. Stop it just a minute.
Peter, Paul and Mary.
Don't carry it on the mountain to let my people.
He's a missing part of the history of the early days of rock and roll. He was a catalyst, he brought people together.
Now, Lisa Turner, Martin Carthy and myself, accompanied by David Graham and Pete McGurk, are going to give a new slant to an old song, and it's called, by Leadbelly, it's called My Girl.
To say that he was an enabler doesn't really begin you know, to describe it.
In the pines, in the pines.
He was somebody who wanted you to be able to do your best. He always gave it everything he got, and that made you want to do the same. And he had that capacity for keeping it simple, keeping it basic.
His head was found in the driving wheel, and his body never has been found.
It was focused, right down tight. And I think that was a feature of everything he did, myself.
He used to sing all the time. I mean, walking down, you know, the road.
Driving us to school.
Driving us to school.
Yeah, we used to sing songs like the whole way to school, you know, just endless.
It just seemed
songs.
normal.
When Jules Holland, my husband, started to film later, he met Martin Carthy. And Martin had a videotape which came through the letterbox, and we sat down and watched it. And at the end of that first programme, there was a short silence, and then Jules turned to me and said, "You've married your dad." Because it is so similar to later, it's just uncanny.
What an amazing coincidence that decades ago his television show was devoted to folk, blues, world and alternative music. in front of a live audience, with the host sometimes joining in. And if that wasn't enough of a coincidence, he also made these records. Hootenanny! Hootenanny! But the big difference is I play the piano and he played the guitar, and he played it in a beautiful, distinctive way.
Seven the doctor come. Oh, doctor, can you save me one?
Rory didn't play like a white man trying to play the blues. He had his own particular, very convincing, confident kind of style of playing.
No one else was playing 12-string, and also it was very authentic, and it was very, you know, it was very close to how Leadbelly played, which was quite difficult. People later on have, you know, used 12 strings, but it wasn't as elaborate as the way Rory played it. He played with finger picks and played everything.
If you had finger picks, they came from America. They were called Nationals. I remember when I first got my finger picks, I slept in them. The point about the 12 is that these double strings, you get very big sound on each string. So almost as if each string is a chord. Leadbelly said it should be played like the left hand of a barrelhouse piano player. And Rory took off with this thing, actually much more than Leadbelly did.
He was a very great showman. He enjoyed it, you know, you could see he enjoyed it.
At the height of Hullabaloo's success, Rory made an extraordinary decision. He walked away from television and the world of music.
He talked about it as if it was a painful decision, like letting go of music. But what he wanted to be doing was painting, and just painting all day long.
I think that's where he felt he was at his most serious. There were, you know, other people could play music, other people could write, but he had this unique brilliance about the way that he painted.
Rory's focus now turned to botanical painting, his first love.
Every morning he would get up early and he would go and paint.
It was like a sort of 9 to 5. I mean, he just went to the studio in the morning and came back in the evening. And even if he was travelling, I think he always worked a pretty decent day's work, sort of regardless.
He would just focus down and get into it. And I just remember it being extremely calm for several hours at a time.
When I first saw Rory's botanical paintings, I could barely believe it. They were just so incredible. The life pulsating through the pictures were quite something.
Rory's depictions of flowers and plants pay close attention to botanical detail, but they're more than dry scientific illustrations. The paintings have a life and luminosity about them. Their beauty is breathtaking.
His botanical paintings, though rigorous and accurate and conforming to those stern disciplines of the botanical artist, had a kind of Zen lift-off, I thought. I lived with them and hung them on my walls, and they spoke to me in a different way to other illustrative pictures. I hung them beside works by Hockney or Kitaya and Lucian Freud. They sang together.
I only once saw him paint, because I don't think he particularly liked people watching him painting. But he asked me up to his studio, and he was wearing spectacles, and he had these little paints and these tiny brushes, and this really detailed work. It was so detailed you could barely see what he was actually doing as he did it. It was like watching a watchmaker repairing a mechanism, you know, where you know they're doing something, but you don't know what it is, as they sort of do these tiny little marks on it. And with complete intensity, focus on the job. It was kind of magic, really, watching him do it. Because what came out,
Rory chose to paint on a material rarely used by modern artists, vellum.
When I first discovered that Rory was painting on vellum, which, in my ignorance, I didn't know what it was, but it turns out it's actually calf skin, which is kind of... that helps to bring that living matter to life, in a way.
The way he's just captured the light and the drama in such a simple form. Art is about questioning our presence in life, and that's what Rory did. He's curious, and that comes through in every brushstroke. To paint on vellum, it's a very different technique to painting on paper, because the surface is very smooth and the watercolour sits on top. It doesn't sink in. You have to use tiny little paintbrushes marks and very, very little water. And this is called a dry brush technique. This means that it takes a long time to build up the layers and to make something look as magical as how Rory did in his work.
Oh, I'm a country chappie and I'm serving in...
Painting botanical art didn't mean life was quiet. Married to Romana, with a growing family, Rory's London home became the hub of a giddy 1960s scene, a million miles from the disciplines of his meticulous art.
Rory was definitely like the social, you know, he would be out there inviting people back to Tregunta Road, where our mother would be catering for these sort of, you know, crowds of people who would be arriving.
Everything was changing. Things were appearing every day, new artists, new musicians and so on, and most of them turned up in Tregunta Road.
They must have had a party a night.
To me, they were just dazzling. You know, you go in there and you, first of all, be quite a sort of smattering of quite famous people, a lot of very pretty girls.
There might be a Beatle or two wandering around.
Bob Dylan was there.
I mean, I met the Everly Brothers there.
It was so exciting, in a way, that you thought, well, afterwards you think, well, was that John Lennon in the corner of the room?
I remember going there once when Ravi Shankar had been playing with George Harrison, I think, at the Festival Hall or somewhere. Came back there after a party and suddenly sit down and out comes the sitar and starts playing that.
The sitar was a completely new thing. We hadn't heard about it, you know, and he was playing, and we were absolutely in hushed awe.
That was how cool it was. That was how sort of, you know, accessible it was to people like Ravi Shankar, who never played at private concerts ever, but he did play for Rory.
I remember feeling slightly sort of embarrassed because I thought they obviously don't like it because they're all shaking their heads. We used to give hand things round in our dressing gown and pajamas. Did you? I mean, I remember doing that.
Yeah.
And I remember making a beeline because Princess Margaret was there, and I was like, "Oh, it'll be obvious which one, you know, she'll have a tiara and maybe wings," and then saying, "Well, where is the princess?"
Rory was completely at ease in the middle of all this, not at all frantic, and looked like the sort of king of the party because he looked so wonderful. There was a sort of feeling of excitement and 60. I mean, you did feel this really was one of the good things about the 60s, parties like this, and that you were very lucky to be there.
The 60s wasn't all about parties. It was a time when art was changing too. Abstract, experimental, and pop art were now all the rage. Rory's friend, American pop artist Jim Dine, was a major influence on Rory at this time.
I really believe that he was attracted to the fact that in our culture, in American culture, the kind I grew up in, or New York art world culture, one was able to express themselves much more with free association.
He was very glamoured by New York. He was glamoured by the big paintings, by the Met, by the sort of Showtime art. And I think he really wanted to be there because, you know, artists want to be seen, they want to make a name. And he did want to be up there with big canvases and stuff. And indeed, those New York poets who came over were kind of thought, what's he doing, painting flowers, you know, high realist paintings? I think they were almost embarrassed by it.
Spurred on to find a bigger, newer platform, Rory began experimenting with sculpture, working with a range of materials, including glass and perspex.
If you look seriously with the kind of mindset that an artist like Rory it was all about, then it should be of no surprise to you that he is also experimenting with the nature of light, because light is a way of explaining time passing.
I thought he was wasting his time by going to fabricate these glass pieces. I thought it was a complete waste of money and time. And it really, really made me angry to see a waste like this. But there's nothing you could tell him. He wanted to be a so-called modern artist. So-called. So stupid, you know? So stupid.
When I was barely 10 years
Rory also turned his hand to filmmaking, following German sculptor and performance artist Joseph Beuys, as he completed a live action on Rannoch Moor in the Scottish Highlands.
I think Joseph Beuys is very connected to the earth and the land, and something that they were actually appreciative of the same things, you know. I mean, they must have been to make that film.
Sculptures, films, Rory did not want to be pigeonholed as a traditional botanical artist.
I think he was vulnerable because I remember him talking about his relationship with people like Jim Dine and the American artists who were painting very big paintings. And I remember him saying, you know, it's just so great the way everything's so big in America and they can do these big paintings. And there was a sort of sense of, I wish I could do that.
Rory's search for the new and the bold did pay off. His paintings became more minimalist and more dramatic. He now included fruit, vegetables, and nature in decay.
Rory had that incredible capacity to show the world in an onion, and it carries with that all the kind of miraculous life of all the plants in the world in the one thing.
The onion paintings are so beautiful. I mean, when I look at those paintings, I don't see an onion. I just see something, you know, the paintings are really exquisite. It's like a jewel. It's something really precious and amazing.
All painters, in a way, teach you how to look at the world, and Rory's, by showing you the tiniest detail of a leaf, was actually teaching you about life and death, nature, colour, the importance of everything around you.
He was getting better and better and better, finally coming to terms with this is what he was put on Earth for. It told what the plant was about, rather than just capturing it. Not in an expressionist way, but in a deeply human way. And it was the best of Rory, really the best.
In the late 70s, Rory was diagnosed with cancer. He was 45. It spurred him on to painting perhaps his greatest works.
The leaf paintings all have titles of places. They don't identify the leaf. Where he picked the leaf up is what was important.
I remember when he was ill that he had to walk very slowly. And he said how he really enjoyed it because he was seeing so much more.
These leaves, they're memento mori, they're specific to a time and a place. They're extremely powerful images which meant a lot to him in his life.
It's like a map of his life. All those paintings, all the places that he... I mean, our mother lived in East 61st Street. That's, I think, where he met her.
By 1982, Rory's cancer returned, and he was told that his brain tumour was incurable.
All his friends were pretty desperate when we knew he was ill, and he put a very good face on it, and he used to wear a rather wonderful turban to hide the operation and the whatever treatment he'd had, and carry on as though things were normal.
I think he was in extreme pain, and he was listening to music. Our Walkman cassette machines had just come out, and he would listen to either opera or Indian music as a way of dealing with it.
He couldn't play his guitar, he couldn't sing, plus he was in a lot of pain. It was miserable. And he said, you know, I remember trying to sort of cheer him one day, and he said, it's just, you know, this is a very dark place.
High upon Elands and lay upon Tay, Bonnie George Campbell.
Well, I heard that he had left the house, walked to South Kensington Tube Station, and put himself under a train.
I was just completely devastated, and I still can't really cope with it. I just, you know, I have to go somewhere else, really. It's just terrifying.
I hardly could take it in. To me, it was gruesome.
He was such a gentle person, and the violence of his death was such a sort of terrible conflict. That has been something very hard to sort of deal with in a lot of ways.
He would have been the last person you would have thought that they would have been put in a position where that was their only option. And I think I can only imagine how bad things must have been for that to be the case.
In came his good horse, but never came he.
Rory was just 50 when he died, but his story doesn't end there.
Rory was really my mentor, and he taught me how to play the 12-string. I feel that I'm the sort of one of the last practitioners of this lead belly style. 18, 19, 20 years ago, took my gal to the country store. And then when he died, he left me this Guild guitar, which is a beautiful 12-string, and I treasure it. Whoa, whoa, buck and he bought a lamb, who made the buck cunning.
So I never met my father-in-law, this extraordinary man, Rory McEwen. He was the first to do so many things. As Van Morrison said earlier, he was instrumental in bringing the blues to Britain, and he was the first person to do what I do in television. But would I give up my career in music and television as he did? The answer is no. Because even if I lived to be 1,000 years old, I could never, ever paint as beautifully as he did. And it is his paintings that are a fantastic legacy. I hope you've got a sense of this incredibly gifted man and how he shared those gifts. And I hope you've enjoyed his story.
Candyman, 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 Candyman. I'd do anything in this whole wide world to get my Candyman home.